Good morning. You all heard that the recording is in progress, so the meeting is recorded, not transcribed, as I understand. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, not transcribed, recorded. So welcome. I'm Jane Dolan, President, and I am calling this meeting, workshop of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board of July 14th, 2023 to order. We always ask for if everyone who wishes to log on has been admitted. Okay. Do we have any introductions, Mr. Lee?
No introductions.
Any specific announcements?
No announcements.
No announcements. Then I will ask our board clerk, Ryan Jones, to call the roll to determine a quorum. Even though I can see it, he's going to call it.
Board Member Ramirez.
Here.
Board Member Griego.
Here.
Board Member Countryman.
Present.
Board Member Bosler.
Here.
Secretary Johnson.
I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Vice President Valines.
Here. President
Dolan.
Do you know it's here? I am here. We do have a quorum, all members present. So that's great. We have a single workshop item, and I will, in a few minutes, turn that over to Greg Harvey of our Flood Systems Improvement Branch. The workshop today is intended to be information, board discussion, and of course, input from anyone who wishes to do that. I think the only decision that we're being asked to do is to designate two board members to be a committee with staff to work through any number of issues they're going to identify. So I've already chosen the committee, which I'll announce at some point. I'm going to be on it. So any pre-comments from board, or ready to get started with Mr. Harvey's presentation? All right. Greg Harvey, you are on point.
Good morning, President Dolan, members of the board. Is this working? Yes.
We do want to hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Today we're going to have an interactive workshop on the designated floodway modernization program, and Renato and the HDR team are going to help lead a PowerPoint today. We've given a few presentations over the past few years. We have an existing task order that we're working on updating some of the areas, but it's a really large effort. So we're hopefully going to secure some resources in the future to broaden our effort. So today the presentation is going to cover a little bit of what we've done and to date so far, and then the scope of the modernization program going forward, a technical or the programmatic or holistic approach. And also a big part is the integration with the designated floodway program with other existing state programs and initiatives. So I think that's a key factor of getting the boundaries and the modernization of the DFs to integrate with other programs. And then also, as board president mentioned, a steering committee, hopefully a potential steering committee with some one or two board members and some other members of different agencies, the department and locals to get together and go over policy issues and some of the other integral parts to make this successful modernization. So that's the plan for the PowerPoint today. It's going to be about an hour, and then I think questions can be asked anytime during. We want it to be interactive. You don't have to hold your questions to the end. So I think it's going to be really informative. So with that, Renato, if you'd like to begin the PowerPoint.
Thank you, Greg. President Dolan, members of the board, thank you for having me here today. I'm Renato Espinosa Torres with HDR, and I'm going to be talking about our designated floodway program modernization efforts. I do want to point out that this picture that we see on the cover of this presentation, this is flooding that occurred along the Cosumnes River which is a designated floodway, and this is flooding that occurred in 2023.
Thank you for that. We always like photos to be identified. Appreciate it.
Yep. Here's an overview of the topics we're going to be covering today. As Greg mentioned, we're going to be talking about the scope of the modernization effort. And I do want to ask that for a little bit of patience from some of you, some of the slides that we're going to go through and some of the topics that we're going to cover at the beginning of the presentation, we've covered before in our 2022, February of 2022 presentation. But I think it's important for other folks that did not catch that presentation, maybe new members of the board, and then also to provide context for some of the other material that we're going to be presenting today. Again, today, the purpose of the presentation is to provide an update, but we also want to get feedback from the board on topics that we know are going to influence the scope and our approach for the modernization effort. We want to highlight some of the issues that are currently, present in the designated floodway delineations in the program and how modernization would benefit the program as a whole. And then also, as you mentioned, we are asking for the board's support to form a steering committee to help address some of the topics that will influence the direction of the modernization effort. Okay. Let me see. Please feel free to jump in and ask questions, or if folks have comments as we go through. We're going to start with the very basics. So what is a designated floodway? According to the California Code of Regulations, it's the channel of the stream and that portion of the adjoining floodplain reasonably required to provide for the passage of a design flood as indicated by floodway encroachment lines on an adopted map. It is also the area between two levees as adopted by the board or legislature. For today's presentation, we're going to focus a little bit more on the first part of this definition. We can also address any questions or topics that relate to the second part of the definition, but it's the first part that we're really going to highlight some of the issues that are present with the designated floodways. I also want to mention that per the California Code of Regulations, the board not only has authority to delineate and assign designated floodways, but after the designated floodways have been delineated, the board also has the authority to determine allowable uses within these designated floodways. That's California Code of Regulations, Title 23, Section 101.
Thank you so much for not saying just Title 23, since we don't own the whole title. I'm glad that you put these up, but I'm wondering if you also at some point in the future, maybe when the committee is formed, put the statutory authority that the board has as well, because it's pretty direct, pretty thorough.
We have a couple additional quotes. I think this is important.
There's the water code.
So here's the California Water Code, Section 8609. The board designates floodways for the purpose of protecting public improvements, lives, land use values, and improvements created in reliance upon historical flooding patterns. I want to highlight this because one of the things that, as I talk with people about the designated floodway program, people that work in flood are oftentimes familiar with FEMA regulatory floodways, and these are different. It's not the same thing. I'm going to provide a little bit more information about the differences today. Just going to touch on the topic. But this is the purpose for the designated floodways per the water code. Let me see. So why are designated floodways important? Properly managed floodways can provide significant economic, social, and environmental value. As far as economic and social value, designated floodways are a tool to manage flood risk, protect lives and property. Adequate space permitted for flood passage slows runoff and provides storage for flood waters. Essentially, it will reduce the impact of a passing flood. A quick note from the National Institute of Building Science. For every $1 spent on federal mitigation grants, flood hazard mitigation saves an average of $7. So it's a lot cheaper to plan and protect for floods than it is to recover after an event. And that's an important reason why our state needs to invest in this program. As far as the environment, designated floodways support riparian habitat and native species. And I'll get a little bit more into that as we go through the presentation. A couple more notes, particularly as the board designates floodways. Here are some considerations, and this is important because it's relevant to why we need to modernize the designated floodway program. So as the board proposes or modifies designated floodways, the board has to consider, per the California Code of Regulations, existing and projected federal, state, and local flood control improvements and regulations affecting floodplains. You also have to consider the degree of danger from flooding to life, property, public health, and welfare, and the rate and type of development taking place upon the floodplain. So if we go back to the purpose of designated floodways, which is to protect lives and property, essentially this is saying if an area is being developed very quickly, the board should consider making sure that those designated floodways are accurate and properly managed. And then also, I think this is one of the last notes from the California Code of Regulations. If after the adoption of the designated floodway and floodway encroachment lines, the board determines that conditions have changed sufficiently to necessitate altering the lines, the board may, at any regularly noticed meeting, make modifications to the designated floodway as it deems appropriate. So just noting that per the California Code of Regulations, the board has the authority to update designated floodways when it is necessary to do so.
Well, let's get on it. Been a while.
Okay. I mentioned that designated floodways are not the same as a FEMA regulatory floodway or a FEMA special flood hazard area. I just want to emphasize this. I think this is a source of confusion, and oftentimes there are questions. Why do we need designated floodways if FEMA has special flood hazard areas? There is a different purpose for each of those. And for the state of California, the designated floodway program is very important. And I do want to highlight here, this map on the right shows the extents of the designated floodways in the California Central Valley compared to the extents of FEMA special flood hazard areas. It's a big area, so it's a little bit difficult to see, but the pink polygons there, those are the designated floodway extents. The blue polygons, that's the FEMA special flood hazard areas. So only about 50% of the designated floodways coincide with a special flood hazard area. There are a lot of reaches, miles and miles of streams that are not covered by FEMA special flood hazard areas. And there's a reason for that. Okay, going back to the purpose, so FEMA's purpose is for flood insurance. They provide flood insurance for recovery, and they do provide mitigation for flood impacts before an event. They have grant programs that maybe can be leveraged for the purpose of the designated floodway program modernization. The designated floodway program, however, the main goal is to protect lives and property and mitigate flood impacts. So there is a difference there. And I would say another major difference is that the designated floodway program preserves the designated floodway to allow for passage of a flood. The board does not allow for the majority of the designated floodways structures for human habitation. And that's in the California Code of Regulations. FEMA will allow for construction of structures and houses within a special flood hazard area. Also, within the state, FEMA, typically within the country, FEMA has a focus on urban areas. So the majority of the areas where there are detailed studies that were developed by detailed methods, hydrology, hydraulic models, those are located in urban areas because they're there to provide information for flood insurance and protecting developed areas. But the Central Valley, the designated floodway program has floodways delineated in many rural areas, but that are important because those areas, if not properly managed, can impact other parts of the system. So again, coverage is another big difference between the two. And then methodology, and yes. Yes, of course.
Yikes, sorry. Wake up, everybody. If I heard you right, I mean, I know this, I just want to walk through this for a second.
Yes,
So in the designated floodway, right, we don't usually have dwelling units.
right.
So let's just say hypothetically, we were going to find a new designated floodway, add to it, and there are dwelling units in it. What's the situation then?
You're asking the hard questions right away. No, so we, one of the things that we are proposing is we want to form a steering committee to answer precisely those types of questions. One of the things that we would like to propose as part of the designated floodway program modernization is to go back and revisit the California Code of Regulations to address topics exactly like that. We do not have the answer yet, and we would need to consult with the board further on it, but we first need to develop some well-prepared recommendations for that. Yes, Board Member Countryman?
Yeah, along those lines, I'm very concerned and have been for a long time that our board is not a land use regulating entity. And I don't believe we should try to become a land use regulation entity. That's been designated to the counties and the cities. And there's quite a bit of cost involved with and mainly using whatever flood plain information that they have, most prominently the FEMA, and I believe they also, use other things. But if you're saying to provide these benefits, the board is gonna stop somebody from building a house in a floodway, if you put the house up on fill or something. I don't get that. I think we're going past where we should be going. Are you going to address those? And the other question I have, has any local entities asked for help with redoing the designated flood? Instead of coming top down, shouldn't it be coming from bottom up, making these requests?
Thank you. So two things there. We are focusing on what the California Code of Regulations and the Water Code state is the responsibility of the board. So we're not trying to, and this is partially why we're asking for a steering committee to make sure that we're not stepping out of our lane. We want to, invite the board's council to be a part of that steering committee to make sure that we are following the board's charge per the California Code of Regulations and the Water Code correctly. So that's the first question. The second one is, yes, we definitely, and you'll see as part of this presentation a little bit further down, there needs to be a lot more coordination with the locals and with other agencies such as DWR, and that's something we're proposing that we start doing.
I can tell you, Mr. Countryman, that 25 years ago, Butte County asked for assistance and got it and cooperated. Board Member Ramirez, and we're just all waiting. Give me a little note.
Go just stirred the pot,
Ramirez.
right? Yeah, I will just say this conversation happens regularly, maybe not often enough, about the language in statute and in the regulations that deals with our authority and land use. Our former president used to say the same thing in public meetings, and I think it's up for interpretation, but I can't help but read the language and think that it does give us land use authority. It doesn't give us the same land use authority. It's different, right? Like people can build in the floodways. We just have to permit it to make sure that it is not going to impede the floodway. It's not the same as what color is the window or how many rooms in your house for the square footage. It's different. It's related, but it's different. And it's not entirely unique. The state has this authority other places, but not everywhere, right? Coastal Commission, BCDC, there's a reason we have the authority. And it is complicated and obviously politically complicated with individual cities, counties, and landowners on the ground. It always will be. And it's confusing. Like even the federal layer here, like the question that was asked, I'm looking at the map, like, okay, I'm not sure I know what that means either. So that said, it's a super important tool in our toolbox. And I thought about how to describe this, so I'm going to try to do it maybe differently than I've done before, but we generally focus on the state plan of flood control facilities, right? The levees, whether on federal sponsor, it's pretty clear, pretty straightforward. It's what we spend 99% of our time on, right? There's two, what I'm going to call boundary conditions on that working model that are also described generally. And they're outlined a little bit in the descriptive documents that are part of the flood protection plan update. They're not in the plan, but they're in the descriptive documents of the state plan of flood control, right? And the two assumptions are that all the reservoirs get operated the way they're supposed to be operated under the federal rule curves that are set up. We don't have any control over those, but it's an assumption that the state plan of flood control facilities are going to rely on the reservoirs being operated that way so that we can make sure the conveyance capacities are able to hold that water, right? And the other boundary condition is the DF program, designated floodway program. Like those numbers have history and meaning for the state plan of flood control facilities, and it's the way the state has decided to confirm that the water coming into the state plan of flood control is included in the analysis so that those facilities are protected. And so we have this authority to make sure that those floodways are clear and those numbers are supposed to add up. And they don't, right? That's the other thing. We know the numbers don't add up, especially now based on what we know. So it's overdue for an update. I was joking with one of our members in the audience who will speak later that we had this discussion, with the board in the 90s, and it was, I'm sure the staff came and said, oh, these things are so old, they're 20 years old. And today we're going to hear people say, oh, these are so old, now they're 40 years old. So I hear you. I just want to make sure that when we talk to each other and we talk to the public and we talk to cities and counties in particular, that we go in a little deeper to what land use authority means so that it's not, we're not trying to pick a fight with people, right? We don't want to work against people, but we want them to work with us. And I'm glad that Butte County asked for help. There's lots of places we know that people are building in designated floodways and they haven't come to the board. And that's going to create a problem in the future unless we address it. In the meantime, if somebody wants to do a restoration project on the Tule River and Tulare Basin, they have to come get a permit from us, right? Because they have a grant, it's public funding, we know about it, and we're raking them over the coals to do hydraulic analysis about it. But other people are just doing other things, and we're not aware of those things until somebody brings it to our attention, and they don't come to the board right away. And we don't want that to happen either. We have to find a way to bring those things here so that the staff are aware of them and they can be considered fully. And I apologize for jumping into the presentation,
Oh, no,
but
no.
I wanted to make sure we had talked about this, and probably better to do it at the beginning than the end, so.
I think you bring up a very important point of what the floodway, I think most people think of the floodway as the area in the state plan of flood control. Nobody's arguing that there shouldn't be strict controls on the land between the levees or the land in the bypass area. I think there's 100% agreement on that we should strictly engage in that. My concern is things like in Tulare County, where water goes overland and vast areas are flooded. And somehow we're going to be responsible for this huge area and go around and find everybody that built a house and whatever. I just think it's beyond the scope of what we're even able to do. And when you talk about how many miles, you know, there's thousands of miles of channels, creeks, and all kinds of things. Are we going to go out and do designated floodways on each one of these little streams? What are we actually talking about here? Okay.
Yeah, we're not making those decisions today, and we can only do what's within our capacity and authority as well. Member Bosler. All right, Member Grego?
It seems like the conversation just kind of jumped into, you know, these questions, and so I just want to add a little bit to it. You know, first of all, when we look at floodways, are all floodways created equal? And so that's something that I'd like the committee to take a look at and make those determinations and how they operate. Old floodways versus new proposed floodways that are, you know, being asked to maybe develop in those areas. You know, the committee needs to really look at how are we going to play our part in making things safe for the public. In regards to the how do we work with local government, I mean, you know, Jane and I have President Dolan and I have a lot of experience in local government and how it relates to land use, the general plan, the housing elements. I mean, those are the tools that they're working with. But I think that there is some obligation, and I think we're giving that through the government code section to work with local government in order to, so they see the picture of their decisions. You know, when Yuba County wants to have a permit for a building or a shed or whatever in a floodway, their building department, who is also their flood person for the county, makes those determinations. You know, is it going to be, you know, flood proof? You know, because of where it's at in the floodway, and then that comes to this board. Variances are, you know, being proposed at times, and so then we mostly see this on our consent agenda. So it's basically our staff has looked at it and they say yes, and it goes through our consent. And I've noticed that type of action in the past. So those are things that the committee really needs to take a look at. The other thing too, and this is my experience based on my work with Three Rivers, is that when the Corps of Engineers, and I've had this discussion with the secretary years ago, is that when they develop new science, then it changes everything. And because we are so far behind on making, you know, taking up these issues of floodways, that how do you look in the future? Because when the Corps makes a decision, you know, like under seepage issues, you know, that came up, you know, 20 years ago. how do you anticipate what's going to be next? You know, at that time, I was saying, what about climate change? How is that going to affect how you guys build levees and how much water will be going through the channel? And at that time, they said, we're talking about that in Congress right now. And now we're seeing the implementations of that. So, you know, I don't say that we have to have a crystal ball, but we have to be looking forward in regards to how do we, you know, not have to take this issue up every other year in order to be current with it. So those are my thoughts on this particular subject. Thank
Or
you.
every bad storm. And there's another layer of local government that we respect and interact with as well, and that's reclamation of levy districts. So don't want to oversee that. So the board is interested. And
Thank
we
you
wanna
for the
hear-
comments.
We want to hear the rest of how many slides do you have? No one told me before the meeting.
I have about 40 slides.
Okay,
and we're
so
about
go.
a quarter of the way in.
Just
Yes.
give you a little hint there.
Yes.
Please proceed.
And there are a lot of topics that were brought up that are going to be addressed in the presentation, hopefully. And if not, this is why we want a steering committee, so that we do properly address all these concerns. I do want to point out that in this slide, we're showing the extents of the existing designated floodways. So the large polygons, so this is a map of California. The large polygons are the Sacramento, the San Joaquin, and the Tulare Lake Basin. Those magenta polygons, smaller polygons, those are the existing designated floodway delineations. The public can access them through the Department of Water Resources website as the best available maps. That's how they're labeled on there. But that and a small table, which I'm going to show next, is about all the information that is available for these designated floodways. This is one of the concerns that I have, that those designated floodway delineations are already out there. But if we're going to be providing that type of information to the state's going to be providing that type of information, we might as well provide all the information to support those delineations and make sure that they are properly being shown. We have a few statistics here about the existing designated floodway delineations. This is not the floodways between the levees. These are just the ones that are delineated. There's 73 of them. That covers approximately 1,300 miles of streams. And they were all delineated in the 70s and 80s. I think the last one was delineated roughly 88. So it's a long time ago. As was mentioned here, back in the 90s, the board or board staff were recognizing that some of them needed to be revisited even then. So there's limited data available. The models that were used to develop some of these are not available. The work maps, some of them were developed using aerial imagery from historical floods. Those are not available. The only thing besides the delineation that we were able to locate as we were searching for the backup data for these designated floodways is a PDF that provides some information about the designated floodways. You don't need to read, the small print. You will get a copy of this presentation after the meeting if you'd like, but yes. And, but I will get into the content of this table. One thing I do want to point out is that back in the 90s, there was an effort made back then to evaluate the adequacy of these designated floodway delineations. And even back then, a lot of them got low scores, 2, 3. And there was an objective approach to evaluating how adequate they were. Were they modeled or were they just approximated using topography? Were they calibrated? Were they validated with high water marks? And the numbers are all over the board. There's some that do have a 10, but again, they're very old. So this is, I think we can update these delineations and have all this data available so they can be verified and so it can make processes for permitting and for making decisions a lot more efficient. So this is what we're going to cover in this next part of the presentation is why modernization is needed. We're going to talk about these 6 topics. I'll just go ahead and jump right into it. The first one is the rivers have moved since they were delineated. On the left here, we can see a section of the Sacramento River. We can see that in 1985, the river was actually contained within the designated floodway delineation. In 2021, not even the main channel of the Sacramento River is contained within the floodway delineation. And we did an evaluation of the delineations, and approximately 3/4 of them have visually inadequate sections that you can see that maybe there's a floodway that's clipping really high ground, or the channel meanders out of the boundaries. And this can lead to inaccurate management practices, unidentified encroachments, and potentially unsafe permits. So we just want to update the delineation so when the permits are issued, that they're issued using accurate information. Population growth. Again, in California, there's been a lot of urbanization. Here we see a designated floodway in Kern County. This is near Bakersfield. We see that in 1994, this area was very rural, and in 2020, that area has been developed. So again, just providing accurate information so when we know where the boundaries for that development, or so how the development can be done safely, that would be a lot of help. Development based on outdated designated floodway boundaries could create increased risk to life and property. And this is, I think, the main purpose of the designated floodways is to protect life and property. Yes,
Sure, question. Can you go back one slide
yes.
to the river movement? One more. The river movement. There you go. So all that's true, but I couldn't transition to the next slide because I'm not sure what to do about it. Like if we have a DF set up and the channel's allowed to migrate and we're wanting it to do that, then how would we manage the floodway? I'm not pretending that we have an answer today, and I'm sure you're going to give it to Jane and her subcommittee anyway, but it's not a recorded title or an easement on fee title, which is surveyed, right? But it just seems like a really hard thing to get your head around. How are we going to try to do that in a way that is protective of life and property if the channel continues to move around?
Just a little clarification on today, if I might.
Yes.
You two are probably going to say yes, because I've been reading all of this stuff. Your observations and your questions, your input, all of us here are exactly what is the purpose of today. Not the answers to it, but bringing forward what must be considered for this work that is our statutory duty and our regulatory obligation. So I'm seeing some nods. So yes, bring it all up, and you can see we're very chatty on that because we care.
Yeah, and I thank you for making that observation. My point wasn't to get stalled here. I just wanted to flag it as a question, and please continue. I didn't want to slow you down.
No, that's a very good question.
Glad it's all being recorded and putting down notes whenever you speak. We're going to record it, transcript, as opposed to me.
I think one of the other questions that was asked earlier was, are all designated floodways created equal? And they are not. So back when they were being developed, I think the information that was available for some of those streams was a lot more limited. So the board staff at that time did what they could do with the data they had. We have an additional 50 years of data. Back then, the goal was to try to develop designated floodway delineations that were either based on a 50-year or 100-year flood. Some of them were 10 years, some of them were 20-year. It went all the way from 10 to 150 years, so they're not all created equally. Some of them were developed using approximate methods, aerial imagery, topographic maps, and not models and not actual flood data. And others were modeled with different methods. Some of them were modeled just having a 100-year flow going through a hydraulic model, and some of them use this FEMA floodway analysis where you have a 100-year flow go through the channel, and then you squeeze the resulting floodplain to get a 1-foot rise. And that narrower band is what was actually mapped as a designated floodway. There's a handful of them that were mapped that way. So the standards at the time were all over the place. So that's one thing that we would like to recommend. We still recognize that not all floodways are created equal. So there may be good reasons to make exceptions to the methodology used to analyze a particular or delineate a particular floodway, but certainly not base it on a 10-year return period, for example, because that's going to flood 3 times in the type, of a standard mortgage. Okay, other reasons why modernization is needed. We mentioned climate change. So previously, like back in the 70s and 80s, hydrology was thought to be somewhat static, that the climate in California was going to remain pretty regular. Now we know that's not true. Not only do we have an additional 50 years of record to inform those delineations, but we can also expect more frequent severe storms. And that compared to the historical hydrology will, help us make better decisions, not only about how to delineate the designated floodways, but there's a lot of information that can be generated through this program that can help both the board and permittees make better decisions on their investments. And then also, since the 80s, how many flood improvements, restoration projects have been constructed that are not being taken into account? These types of projects influence the extents, the path. I worked on a project in the Oroville wildlife area where we notched one of the embankments there. There's a designated floodway going there through the Feather River. And now you have the flood when it gets to a certain level over top. So it might actually narrow the designated floodway there.
If they're allowed.
So I mentioned that at the time when the designated floodways were delineated, the existing delineations were created, there was limited data. The tools over at that time were also, more rudimentary. We have more, better tools. 2D models are, very easy to generate. Now the state has collected topographic data basically for the entire Central Valley. So we can leverage this information that's already available. Tools like HEC RAS, which is free software and has made these huge advancements to be able to better determine the extents of a particular flooding event. So just the amount of information that's available helps give, provide a reason for revisiting these designated floodways, particularly when we know that they're in such bad shape. The state has generated tools through the CVFPB program, CVHS hydrology, CVFPB, which the board adopts. So there are already models developed for about 50% of the designated floodways. There's already hydrology. It's not something that you can just take off the shelf, run, and you're done. But 90% of the work in developing the tools to actually determine the extents of these delineations has already been done for these particular streams. And that's not accounting for potentially models that may be available when we engage other agencies, let's say FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers, and other branches from the Department of Water Resources. So I suspect that about 70-75% of the designated floodways, we can find an existing model that can be effectively modified to do this more efficiently.
And I think that those are important avenues to look at, but I also think that the local perspective, I mean, you've got people that will live there for decades, and you need to also check in with them because they know how water runs on their property, especially in the farming community, ranching community. That's another avenue that you always have to take in consideration.
Absolutely. No, that's a very valid point. And that's why as we go through the proposed approach for updating the designated floodways, we're not proposing to do this in a vacuum, just, model it and then update the designated floodways. We're proposing a more holistic, more comprehensive plan that includes engagement with locals and with other agencies. And the beginning of that would be the steering committee.
Well, that's a policy and a standard of this board, so it's not something we neglect. We're proud of it.
Lastly, on why designated floodways need to be updated or should be updated, the designated floodway program, again, not only would it not be updated in a vacuum, it also doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are other state programs and initiatives that can be directly supported, affected, helped by the designated floodway program if modernized. There's the obvious ones like flood risk mitigation, public safety, but there are multi-benefit projects, groundwater recharge, climate change preparedness. I'm going to get into more detail about these topics and specifically, where from the state these initiatives are being pushed. But this is an opportunity for the designated floodway program to help advance these initiatives and actually leverage these initiatives to make the designated floodway program modernization more effective. So let's get into that. What other program or state programs and initiatives does the designated floodway program align with, can help advance, or could be leveraged to advance the designated floodway program? First set of initiatives that I want to highlight is the Governor's Water Resiliency Portfolio. I took a couple of the initiatives, outlined in the 2020 Water Resiliency Portfolio. The initiatives call for state agencies to embrace innovation and new technologies. We're talking about these new models that are available for the state to use, for the board to use, to modernize water data systems to inform real-time water management decisions and long-term planning, and to help regions prepare for new flooding patterns. The Safeguarding California Plan, which is from the Natural Resources Agency, puts forward a principle to consider climate change in all government actions and to prepare California for flooding. Again, this is the state calling its agencies to do the work that we're proposing. And as part of the CVFPB update, 2022 update, Resolution 45, state support actions to sustain floodplain agriculture and avoid more intensely developed land uses, which recognizes the benefits provided to the state's goals for flood risk reduction. Then specific, those are some of the initiatives. Here are some of the other state goals. I mean, California climate is not just becoming wetter and bigger floods. We're also going through droughts that have been highlighted over the past couple decades. And so the state is making a strong effort to better manage groundwater to provide groundwater recharge opportunities. And this is an opportunity where, for example, the picture that we see on the bottom right, that's a DWR Innovative Underground Aquifer Mapping Project. If we were to cross-reference the extents of the designated floodway delineations, once they are updated with the GIS data that's being generated through that program, maybe we can identify locations where they would be prime, there would be prime opportunities for groundwater recharge. Again, cross-referencing, not existing in a vacuum.
Could I interrupt you?
Yes,
You referred to a map on the bottom right.
yes.
Next slide.
Oh,
don't
I'm
see it.
sorry. I apologize.
Oh,
I have two things.
I know I need the
Yes,
glasses.
thank you.
Okay.
Yes, so this is actually, this map here is pretty new. And so the state has a program right now where they are mapping underground aquifers. Cross-referencing this with designated floodways, areas can be preserved precisely to advance this state goal.
Yes.
And
We had a minor presentation on that, and that's certainly a tool that is very
Excellent.
helpful, very important.
absolutely. Okay, next.
You didn't tell me where those were, those photos.
I will, let me go back.
It's a river.
Those are actually Butte and Glenn counties, both which have designated floodways.
What was that?
But not Sigma?
Oh, no, they have,
All examples should be county.
all examples, should be a little bit of Glen. No, they have groundwater sustainability areas, they have groundwater plans, and they have a lot of,
This is
also have
just
a
one
lot of
example.
litigation.
The database they generated actually covers large portions of the Central Valley. So, and I'm sure there's going to be additional information generated through that program. This is just highlighting some of the information that we can reference to not only update the designated floodways, but see how this designated floodway program can be used to advance, leverage other state initiatives. Yes.
I mean, this to me seems, as we're grappling with climate change for different landscapes throughout California, there are different adaptations that are required. I mean, this just seems so clearly like in line with what's needed in the Central Valley. I'm just wondering why this work hasn't been funded by like the climate change assessment or, some of these other major efforts that the government's been doing for now several years. I mean, it just seems like, there's a lot of attention to sea level rise, but flooding in the Central Valley is the way in which climate change is going to manifest itself, at least one of the ways. So I don't know. It feels very like, almost like, why hasn't this happened already? Or is it happening? I know. I'm looking on the climate change assessment because they're talking about with the fifth one and like whether someone's doing the work. It looks like they don't organize themselves in the same way we do. Like there's a Sacramento Valley and a San Joaquin Valley kind of regional looks, but I don't know.
well, we
Just a
saw the
comment, not a
manifestation of
question.
flood
Not a
waters
question.
in
but a comment.
January, February, March of 2023, and the panic and the actions and the threats. Innovation,
I just
moving
wonder,
it here,
like-
there, and everywhere.
Like
So
even before, because I mean, I think, we don't have, this board doesn't have funding to pursue this
Right.
activity right now. But I'm just wondering, even before
Yes.
that time, there is money, like in the climate, the fifth, I think they're working on the fifth climate change assessment. Like, I just wonder if there's ways to leverage some of these other efforts to get more updated maps. More information. I mean, this is really information that we need in order to manage and to protect people and to protect property, but also to be able to know what we need to work on.
good point.
I think that's a really good point. it's information, and one of the reasons why, and then to answer the question, yes, the comprehensive update to the designated floodway program has not been funded. But the reason we do need to do this is because the information that's out there right now, in a lot of cases, it's inaccurate and incomplete. So we're just trying to update the information so that it is more complete, more accurate, and it can be used to make good decisions. Okay, another sector of state initiatives that the designated floodway program intersects with is our economically disadvantaged communities. I just want to point out that approximately 850 miles of designated floodways are adjacent to 95 economically disadvantaged communities. Several of these communities flooded in 2023. We were just talking about one of them, Tulare County, Merced. This image that you see here, this is a photo of a road closed due to the Tulare Lake flooding. And I actually was working with the Department of Water Resources on the emergency response, developing hydraulic models to help the locals, the local communities there make decisions. And the models were not available, and some of these were designated floodways. So if those models were available, the emergency response would have been swifter. We wouldn't have been developing them as the emergency was happening. Updated designated floodways then can provide city and county governments with information to improve land use management, reduce flood risk, and support emergency operations. And if this information is available for the local agencies, counties, cities, they can also use it to support grant funding pursuits.
President Dolan? Got the question, please? Thank you. Can you go back one slide?
Yes.
So I loved all the things you just said. I have one question and one comment. The first bullet, how'd you generate that information?
Cross-referencing GIS layers.
So data we already have.
Huh?
Right? Data the state already has.
Yes.
Right. So that's great. Like that's a good example of doing what you talked about, connecting some of these dots.
Yes.
Right? Like that's already valuable and makes the case to do the work that Member Bosler suggested needs to be done. The observation, which is not the topic of today's discussion, Jane, but I wanted to put it on our radar, maybe to come back at another meeting. There was just a really excellent point made about the benefits of the Tulare Basin being part of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, because if we had tools and data available, it would minimize risk and be helpful for people locally to get assistance. And if we had that foundation established already, we'd be in a better position. And that's one way to have a stronger foundation. So I just wanted to put that flag up.
Thank you for that. And the we in that is multiple agencies.
Correct.
Because the lack of information really hampered response this year.
No, absolutely. I was involved with a couple of those responses, including Tulare County, and then for also the Consumnes River. And the fact that there weren't models available was surprising. Okay. Ecosystem restoration. Again, designated floodways do limit development from encroaching into waterways and conserves habitat. This is something that was highlighted, for example, in the CVFPB. It's just about responsible land management and doing it with complete, correct information. Designated floodways can provide for opportune sites for riparian habitat restoration. And then one of the things that we would like to propose also as part of this designated floodway program modernization is to revisit the current regulations to separate ecosystem restoration or groundwater recharge projects from other encroachment permit. Right now, a groundwater recharge or ecosystem restoration project is treated as just any other encroachment, and maybe providing some avenues through which the burden wouldn't be as heavy for those types of projects would be something that we can achieve through this effort.
May I ask what the slide number is?
25. Do we want to take a break or?
Break in 10 minutes.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. So one of the things
That's
that.
why that's up everywhere, and that's been up for like 50 years. So I don't know if streamline is the right word, but make it useful.
Yes. And help, I mean, help. Right now, I keep saying this, but it is really the problem that there is limited information and more than half that information is incorrect. So how are board staff going to make good decisions, quick decisions, without having all this information available? So analyzing the designated floodways to redelineate them can create models that they can have readily available. Propose an encroachment, you plug it into the model, you see the effects, the water surface elevations, velocities. All this information can be available in a web-based application, and not just to board staff, but maybe to the permittees, so they can, plan ahead and not just propose a project that's not going to work from the get-go. Just make the whole process more efficient. And then again, this is, I think, one of the questions, the bullet down here addresses one of the questions that was asked earlier. How are we going to address encroachments that are currently outside of the designated floodway boundaries, but then when the floodways are redelineated, they are now inside of the designated floodway? That is one of the toughest questions that we will have to answer as part of this effort. And this is one of the first topics that I would like that steering committee to maybe start to tackle, but that's something that, again, if a proper resolution is arrived at, maybe that could be updated in the regulations as well.
Yes, just one second or two. We have a proper resolution. It's the resolution that adopted the update. Member Grego.
So you mentioned the model in regards to knowing how a project might affect flows and, flood protection. And wouldn't we want to share that model with probably the local government, and so that they were able to use this? I mean, people who develop, or somebody wants to build a house, they invest a lot of money in just the process to say yes or no. And so getting that model to the local government and allowing them to use it to see how this project affects the floodway, to me, would be a step in the right direction in regards to process and streamline, as we'd like to say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And seeing also kind of the cumulative impact of different projects. Right now, if there are two permittees and they analyze it separately, you're not seeing the combined impact of both
Correct.
of those proposed
Correct, thank you.
encroachments. Question?
I think there's kind of two different things. There's this one thing about updating the maps and having the information. And then the second thing is what we do with that information. And I think that this is more closely tied with that second piece. And I realize there's a lot of legal issues, so I don't want to underscore that. But I just think we can't be bogged down with some of these things. Absolutely, I'm always interested in streamlined permitting ideas, because I think we have so much triage we have to do at this board particularly. We need to do better there. But I also just hope this effort doesn't get bogged down by sort of the what we're doing with the information, because I agree with going back to Board Member Countryman's comments. There's a lot of really inherently controversial things that go with what this means. But I really think that, if we think about this in the frame of this is more information that will help us make better decisions about how to protect people and property, as well as inform all the investments that we're already making and the ways to improve the system, I think, hopefully we can move this forward. I'm like a little bit confuddled about why it hasn't happened yet. Like, we've spent a lot of money on adaptation and a lot of money studying things, and this seems like kind of central. So
I would take away the kind of, so thank you for that. I see that you're going to a new section, so
Yes.
perhaps this would be a break time?
Yes, I just want to respond to that really quick.
No, I'm not calling it just yet, so yes, that will be transcribed. That's the mission statement. Thank you, Member Bogdan. And the local impact, thank you, Member Grego.
And it's the perfect intro to the next section. So yes, that's exactly what we're going to cover. I mean, I think you're dead on that. There's the technical aspects and the information aspects, but there are all these other things that the program touches. And that's precisely what we're going to talk about next, the scope of the modernization and the different options that board and board staff have.
Thank you for that feedback, for her feedback, Member Bosler, but she also was talking about how other programs interact and need to more appropriately interact with this one as well. So it's not just us working with other entities. We've got to figure out how the other agencies can function with us. We all have the same purpose. I think we all want to do things that save lives. We want to stop the overwhelming destruction of property, and we want to identify how to appropriately handle floodwaters and improve the environment and recharge groundwater as well. Any comments before we take a break? I just want to tell folks we have quite a bit of snacks over here, and everyone is welcome. Good and sugar and non-sugar as well, and some water. So we'll take a break for 12 minutes. We'll be back at 11:30. Break. And the recording in progress has reconvened. So I will turn it to our presenters to continue. And we're on slide number
28. All right. Thanks again. So our next topic is going to be the scope of the designated floodway program modernization. As we've probably noticed through the various slides that we went through already, there are the more direct topics, the more direct technical issues with the designated floodways, the channel meandering out of the current boundaries. And then there are other related topics that we would recommend that at least be reviewed, but most likely be a part of the designated floodway program modernization. And I'm going to cover those topics and provide some information as to how they might benefit the program modernization. So one approach that the board and board staff can take is to simply take the existing design floods or design flows and model them through the available hydraulic models. And that would generate at the very least, a designated floodway that, or designated floodway boundaries that match the existing terrains. Yes?
I think you skipped over. Are you going to define what you mean when you say design flood?
Yes. So the existing design floods were the floods that were used to establish the current designated flood. Yes, and so that is one of the first. We did a comparison actually of like current hydrologic estimates for certain streams and the estimates that were used to develop the existing designated floodway delineations. And in a few cases, they still match pretty well. In most cases, you're right, that they're outdated. There's more information available. As we move forward and update the designated floodways, that's one of the first topics that we need to address as part of the subcommittee. There are, I'll get into that in the presentation.
I just noticed the hydrology is not highlighted here.
It's not highlighted in this particular slide because, so the way I like to think of the modernization effort, we're thinking it could be more of a spectrum. It's not binary. You don't have just this very simple option of taking the design floods that were already used and plugging those into the model, or fixing everything that we can with the program. There are maybe locations in between that that the program can address or update in order to bring the program to a better place. So I'll get into that a little bit here. So let me. Okay, so we actually performed an exercise, and this is along the San Joaquin River, this picture that you see on the right near Fresno. But we actually performed an exercise where we took the existing design flows and plugged them into a model for the San Joaquin River, for Cache Creek, for the Sacramento River, just to see how similar to the existing designated floodway boundaries would be the resulting floodways. And as you can see in this image, the dark pink is actually the existing designated floodway delineation. And this light pink areas are actually what resulted from a two-dimensional hydraulic model. So it's actually not very clean in this. And I wanted to put it into the slide like this on purpose, just to show that this is not a just you plug it in and what comes out, that's what your designated floodway is. There is going to be some post-processing that would be necessary, but it will also require technical and policy considerations, like, for example, what is going to be the design flood, or do you perform a floodway analysis and actually squeeze the resulting floodplain in order to come up with a designated floodway delineation?
I'll call on the president. The dark pink, and that's the darkest color there.
Yes.
That's the current designated floodway, so it's those polygons. It's not a stretch. It's,
No, it is the stretch. I'm sorry. It is the boundary, like you can kind of see it along here.
okay, so it is the one that appears to have borders.
It is one. It's just, we put a mask over the top of it, and this is the resulting, just if you plug those flows into the model, this is what comes out. The water will start to pond here and move through a narrower channel. So actually, in this case, the channel and the resulting floodway may be a little bit narrower than what's existing there. And that's one of the big takeaways that I want to put out, is that in some channels, if, for example, the channel has gotten deeper, it may be that your existing designated floodway boundaries might be far out or moved off to the side from where there actually should be, based on the existing topography.
Did you run a model based on where the flooding wanted to go in February and March of this year?
We ran a lot of models for that.
Didn't have time because you were responding to the crisis.
We ran a lot of models for that, but they weren't part of this specific analysis.
So you picked the San Joaquin River. And in this reach, I assume you're using the design flow of the state constructed levees downstream of this location? Or what are you using for when you say design flows?
We actually used a variety of flows. This is right now, honestly, these are still just pilot studies, sensitivity analysis to understand
But it
What-
raises an interesting question.
Yeah.
Downstream where the state levees start,
Mhm.
it's got a designated design flow of 8,000 CFS. But the 100-year flow may be, I don't know, 60,000 CFS. I think we had 60,000 CFS in 1997. So when you say design flow, I don't know if that's going to work. I mean,
The
you
design.
see the problem here?
Yes, the design flow is actually just a term that per the California Code of Regulations is essentially the flow that the board picks. But there is information that can be generated through the CVFPB, the CVHS, existing FEMA studies, previous levee flows that can use to inform that decision for the board to select a specific flow to which they want to delineate the designated floodway. And that's why we want to form this committee, so that as we're evaluating these streams, and there are different sources of information, or maybe different boundary conditions to consider, such as levees downstream, we can develop a set of recommendations for the board.
And a part of that, you're going to have to make decisions about levee failures.
Absolutely.
Because especially on the San Joaquin, it has a huge impact if the levee fails on the south side or if on the north side.
Absolutely. Even for example, if you look at the CVFPB, they use this methodology to come up with hydrology that is the most likely scenario. And they assume that there are some levee breaches above the reservoir, so that maybe that reduces the peak flow that comes from the reservoirs. I'm not suggesting that that's the methodology we want to use for the designated floodway update, but there are a lot of considerations like that that need to be evaluated
Very
before
complicated.
identifying a designated or a design flow that we would recommend to the board.
President Dolan? Just a quick question.
Yes.
I just want to make sure I understand the map and what you're presenting. So whatever the number is, let's say it was 9,000 CFS, you ran it through the model. The boundary, you highlighted the boundary already, right, with your little red highlighter, the edges of the existing designated floodway.
Right.
So explain to me, you say the water is only going in the light pink?
Yes.
The dark pink, there's no water. And then outside of the floodway altogether also.
Yeah,
Right.
water actually went in this area. So
Right.
it's this light pink
Is where the water's going.
where the water went.
Everything that's dark pink, that flow isn't
Water
inundating
didn't go
those
there.
areas.
Yep,
Okay,
exactly.
got it. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood that,
Yeah.
which is not a big surprise. I'm sure people have, those aren't natural topographies where those straight lines are drawn. So, okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood the map, that's all.
And there's a question about, where do you define the boundaries? Here, this is a good example. This might be really shallow flooding that is maybe less than a foot. Maybe this is not something that one would want to include as part of a designated floodway. Maybe you would. But those are precisely the types of considerations that a technical committee needs to evaluate, and it may be a case-by-case basis. There might be guidelines that generally provide standards for the majority of the designated floodways, but there may be areas that are a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, what does make the point or make the case that we need to update our approach to these responsibilities that we have. So that's fine and useful. And I'm losing my train of thought here. There's another point, a question I wanted to ask about. So let's say that next week, somebody comes to us and they want to do something in the floodway, which we consider to be an encroachment. We would have to model that, right?
Yeah.
And we would be using this model probably, or something like it, right? And we'd only have the authority to assess it at whatever that number happens to be now on the books, right? We couldn't use a different number. we have to use the number that exists, right?
Yep.
So I'm looking at our trustee staff who's nodding their head. Okay, good. Just want to make sure I understood the current situation. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you. So now I want to cover a more comprehensive approach that I think it's necessary in order to really update the designated floodway program as a whole. In today's climate with the information that is available. This one thing I would mention, so a benefit of taking the more simplified approach is maybe initially it would be a lower level of effort. This approach would definitely, at least initially, will require a higher level of effort because it touches on different points, some questions that need to be addressed. How does climate change get integrated into the designated floodway program? What hydrologies to pick? How can we generate information that can help streamline or improve permitting processes? What would the output set of data look like? Is it going to be paper maps? Is it going to be an interactive tool where board staff and the public or the locals can go in and take information so that they can make better decisions and have this information available? Yes. And so was that not clear? And so one of the challenges that the original designated floodway program had was, I think, and this was when one of the existing designated floodways was being delineated. There was a challenge that one of the local governments was going to require that a CEQA permit be pursued. So I think as part of this program modernization, this is something that should be addressed head on from the beginning. That if this is going to be a program that addresses the designated floodways throughout the state, and I'm not a CEQA expert by any, so I might not have the answer yet if there are questions about that. But as I've consulted with other team members that have been supporting this modernization effort, it has been suggested that this would require a programmatic CEQA.
I would call that
To be determined. Yes. And see, that is, thank you. So this is the point of this diagram here. I wanted to put like a spectrum that on one end, we just run the models and what comes out, we use that. On the other end, we take on all these topics that are going to be challenging, but are related to the designated floodway modernization. So yes, there's definitely a middle ground there or a sweet spot that maybe that's what the board and board staff want to address.
Suggestion.
I wrote this down and I failed to mention it when I was bringing up some things I'd like the committee to review. And before we get too far down the road, I want to talk about one of the biggest uses in our floodway, and that's the farming and ranching community. And that, they're finding it a hard time to maneuver and grow their businesses because of FEMA regulations. Exactly. And, so what I would like the committee to review is that how do we keep them in operation and how do we let them grow within those areas? That's something that I feel, agriculture is one of our biggest, businesses in the Central Valley, and we have to keep it in business. So I wanted to bring that up to make sure that is, thank you. I want to bring that up because I want to make sure that that's addressed. Thank you.
Yeah, noted. And even in the CVFPB, the note that we highlighted that is relevant to this program modernization is support actions to sustain floodplain agriculture and avoid more intensely developed land uses. So definitely that's something that.
We even highlighted it with its own dialogue box. Thank you, Bosley.
I would just like to suggest, perhaps there's a phases, right? So I, again, don't think we should be bogged down by all of these things about how the data is being used. At some point, we just need to get the mapping done and the modeling done, and hopefully it's an interactive tool. And then, when you have that, local governments, others can utilize that to make informed decisions. We can utilize it to make our informed decisions, and we can tackle a bunch of those other things on the pie. But again, I would maybe organize it in like a phases. Is one idea.
Be easy to bog down if you try to do it all at once. I'm looking at this, go, okay, where?
Well, and it is inherently very, very controversial to talk about how private land may be impacted by this effort.
I take away may, and yes, it is controversial. This is complex. It's not simple. It's been avoided, and we're gonna move forward best we can.
Yeah, I fully agree. I would just warn and maybe ask that as this committee is formed, that we identify any potential hurdles, that we do these updates and we get to the finish line on doing the technical work. And when we go to the implementation and the update of the designated floodway delineations, that there is we don't hit a wall because one of these other things was not anticipated. That's it. So I'm going to go through a few slides pretty quickly, just of the benefit of this comprehensive approach for modernization, not just running the hydraulic models. This would have the same benefit in reflecting current terrain trends. We would update the hydrology to reflect the additional years of data. This map on the right, that's California, January of 2017. That's the wettest year on record. So we have all of this additional hydrologic data. We need to take advantage of that and bring the delineations to our modern day. We have the opportunity to develop new modeling standards, but leverage the lessons from similar programs. I mean, we can take lessons from some of the standards that FEMA has developed, and I'll mention one. FEMA is actually moving away from, and at least a lot of the industry leaders are moving away from this idea that the floodway analysis, the way it was previously done with 1D models, actually works the way it does. When you do that analysis, it assumes that it impacts the flooding upstream, but with these 2D models that are now available, you see that it's a different pattern of impact that it creates when one just encroaches on the resulting floodplain from the site. So there are plenty of lessons out there from other similar efforts that we need to leverage from the beginning to make this whole process more efficient. And we also, just based on the initiatives and the call from programs like the Safeguarding California plan, need to consider the future of the state, climate change. How is our climate going to change? There are studies out there, and if anything, for informational purposes, that information needs to be on the table when decisions are made as the designated floodway boundaries are delineated. Okay.
We know that, but thanks for saying that. It's recorded.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Okay, we talked about the tools that are now available. Having a public-facing, web-based GIS tool to access data would make the permitting process more efficient. On the right here, this is actually one of the pilot studies that we performed. This is Cache Creek, and the picture is actually the results from a 2D model. This is the extents of the modeling of the floodplain that was modeled. And you can
That
see,
animation going on.
so the cursor that's going down, it's actually me just running the cursor over the 2D area. You can pick the water surface elevation, the depth, the velocity, anywhere on this polygon. And if this information was available at your fingertips when you're evaluating a permit or something like that, just decisions would be a lot more efficient. So maybe this program has a higher initial investment, but on the tail end, it's going to make all the processes a lot better. And again, I think, as was noted earlier, is just having good information readily available.
Is this Cache Creek, Yolo, Solano, or somewhere else?
This is Cache Creek, probably up towards the Cape Valley. Yeah.
Okay. It's like every region has Cache Creek and Dry Creek. Yes.
So actually, I grew up in Woodland, so this is right in my neighborhood.
Backyard.
So, and again, a part of the effort here is to improve permitting processes to have this data readily available, water surface elevations, velocity, and then have the models available so that any proposed projects or encroachments can be easily incorporated and you can look at the results real time. This is looking at the same data set. Advancing. So this is looking at the same data set from the same modeling results, but here we're looking at velocities. And in this one, I've actually included the existing designated floodway delineation. It's hard to see here, but you can kind of see this blue line. One thing I want to note is this dark blue is the main channel, and it actually meanders out of the designated floodway boundaries. And actually, the higher velocities are on either side of the current designated floodway delineation right there. So again, just another
The
example.
narrow black line, is that the
Yep.
current?
Yep. That's the current delineation. And the larger floodplain with the velocity tracers, that's the modeling results from the 2D model. And again, this is data that the model was available through CVFPB, the terrain was available, publicly available. So a lot of this data is already there. We just need to use it.
Yes, because water will do what water will do, not what we put on a map.
Oh, definitely. That's another good point. And I think this was brought up maybe in a previous meeting. Maybe part of the analysis needs to incorporate a evaluating the geomorphology to see if what these floodways might look like in the future. Some initial findings from this pilot assessment. So it did help us understand the level of effort for the designated floodway modernization on the technical side. It did help us understand that it's even though these are all mostly Central Valley streams, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So we're not going to recommend a one-size-fits-all, and particularly when we're engaging with locals. That information needs to be taken into account. And another thing is we found that changing designated floodway boundaries doesn't necessarily mean that you're just going to expand them. In some areas, you're going to shift the designated floodway. So there are areas that are maybe right now currently in the designated floodway that probably shouldn't be. There are a couple of designated floodways that I saw clipping, high ground where the water's never really going to get there. So again, it's looking at these tools that are now available that are easier to look at and more precise. Here, we're just noting that the programmatic approach would be preferable as it will modernize the designated floodway program and align it with critical state initiatives and not just move the lines. Okay.
When we don't respond, it means we agree.
Okay.
Silence is agreement. Oh, okay. Yes, please. You have had your coffee there, Mr. Johnson. You're welcome to talk.
All right. So that was the majority of the presentation. What we are asking for is to form a committee. A lot of good questions were brought up, a lot of topics that we don't have the answers to. And we may have some ideas, for example, for the design flood. how do we define it? That's a very good question. We don't have an answer to that yet. Should we use different standards for urban versus non-urban areas? I know that in the Central Valley, you have a 200-year level of flood protection required for urban areas versus non-urban areas. Is this something where the designated floodway program, maybe make it consistent with that? It's more of a question at this point. Do we incorporate a floodway analysis with 1D models, or maybe do a 2D model with depth times velocity, which is kind of where that methodology is going for determining the area actually needed to pass a flood? How do we incorporate climate change? What technical standards we adopt? And what level of environmental review? There was questions of maybe CEQA or maybe not. And then what is the final product that's going to be generated from this effort?
These are examples of what the committee would begin
Yes.
to attack. I know you want 2 board members and you'll get us. Are you suggesting this committee be solely flood board staff and board? Do you want to
No.
reach out to others? Okay.
Yeah, so actually, we would want, for example, the board's legal counsel to be a part of the committee to make
Well,
sure.
that's staff.
Okay. Maybe
Not a silo.
DWR,
He's part of our group.
maybe the
Maybe? No, yes.
California Central Valley Flood Control Association, just Sigma, yeah.
Our partners,
Yes.
and other programs that certainly deal with
I'd like,
water that is associated with flooding. So, yes.
yeah, I'd
sustainable
like Rod to
groundwater.
be a part of the committee with all,
Tom
Yeah.
Engler in particular.
yeah.
So we would start with our executive officer working with you all will suggest the staff. I will suggest myself and board member Ramirez. I know you can always count on my vice president, I told him. You don't have to do anything if you agree with me. So, but it doesn't mean the board is absent from any knowledge or discussion. It just means you don't have to come to Zoom once a week. So there you are. So we'll sort of figure that out. And then the first thing that we'll do when we meet with this smaller group is who are our stakeholders that we really need to be part of this? And then there's one that's going to be just a little more difficult. How do we bring in the appropriate folks from the state agencies that we coalesce with, we interact with, we're talking about the same subject? And we'll have a really lengthy conversation at some point with our expert on what may or may not be a design floodway, design flow. I think that it's all lowercase, Joe. I don't think it's uppercase yet. Design flow.
Oh, well,
It's like everybody's got theirs. Everybody's got theirs.
I'll get it to you
Whenever I stop.
whenever the queue is settled.
Member Johnson.
I've been quiet here, but listening intently, because I think this is. I said I've been quiet, but listening intently. And starting back at the beginning with, board member Countryman asking, what this program is and what it's for, and had the same questions. I ask him differently because I'm, I'm an attorney and a policy person, but so one of the things I went back and looking at the regs, and I want to read a couple of them for all of you because it came out quickly at the beginning of the presentation, but went too fast for me at least, and so I went back and looked. And so starting with what is a designated floodway? Board member Countryman mentioned the floodway between levees. That's one of two things. It says floodway means either that the floodway between existing levees is adopted by the board or the legislature, or the first one actually is the channel of the stream and that portion of the adjoining floodplain reasonably required to provide the passage of a design flood as indicated by floodway encroachment lines and unadopted map. So it is broader than just, the land within the levees, and includes, for example, floodways upstream, where development could impair the functioning of the state plan of flood control, or have direct, public safety consequences, for its own sake. And a little bit later, the regs also say what the permitted uses are. And, until we change those regs, that, those are the permitted uses. And what it says is these uses may be permitted in the designated floodway so long as alone or cumulatively, in the judgment of the board, they do not unduly impede the free flow of water in the floodway or jeopardize public safety. What is a design flood? Design flood means the flood against which protection is provided or may eventually be provided by means of flood protection or control works, or that flood which the board otherwise determines to be compatible with future developments, right? So what is a design flood, for this purpose? Like, ask the seven of us, right? And we talk, there's a tendency sometimes to talk about what is our authority. And I think on this one, I'm finding it useful to think of it as, what is our responsibility? This isn't written in a way that it's optional for us. And, we can't do everything all at once, obviously, but, what this says is that if people build in a floodway in a way that puts themselves at risk and, they get hurt or it impedes the functioning of the system and we have system failures elsewhere. And the question is, how did that happen? And the answer is going to come back again to the seven of us, right? Like this is the responsibility, one of the responsibilities that the board has. And, turning to the discussion, I'm want to really strongly second what Board Member Bosler has said a couple of times of not getting so hung up on where all of this goes that we can't make progress on developing the information for locals to use and for our partners to have and for us to be informed about. I really don't want to be in a mode of being afraid of what we find as an impediment or hung up on how hard the complexity of it to beginning the process of developing better information. And of course, I don't also just think of this as a responsibility, although it is. There are also a lot of really good reasons for us to do this, including, all of the other state plans that we were talking about and other benefits. Once development happens, it's very sticky. It constrains all the other options, drives up the cost of protecting that development and everything else. And the state has, many other processes that also depend on the floodways being available in many cases or managed in a way that's consistent with what our mandate is for a groundwater recharge and fish and wildlife and ag. The first allowed use in the regs for the floodway is ag, provided that it doesn't unduly impede the free flow of water or jeopardize public safety. So I also think it's a really good idea. And I just wanted to put that out because there was I was confused at least, sort of what this is for and what our actual responsibility is. And I'm glad that we're going to be pushing it forward and have a chance to start developing the information and get to the harder issues. I'll stop there for now. I may have more, as the conversation goes, but I wanted to say that much.
I'm so glad this is being recorded. Many of these things are going to need to be put into words for that. And thank you for going back and putting up the slides that he was speaking to.
Yes, absolutely.
Member Countryman.
I think there's a giant hurdle that this committee has to face and come to grips with. And it's the difference between, we have a levee, if we say it on the San Joaquin River, but it's the same on the Sacramento River. It has a design flow that was developed in 1950 or something.
1957, I was born.
Yeah, and
Don't remind us.
And so we say, okay, that's a design flow. This is the floodway. Now we go over here, and let's say it has a return frequency of 25 years. Now we go over to this other location on the Casumnes River that doesn't have a levee or a design system. And we say, okay, we're going to use 100-year over here. And there's a huge disparity at that point. The people on the San Joaquin River that are living in, say, the 20-year floodplain, they look at the map and say, I'm fine. There's no problem. You go to the place where, you go to Sacramento where they have newly done levees designed for 200-year protection, okay, it kind of works there. But what about up on the Sacramento up north, where we're still using the old design flows that were done for the 1957 profiles? What's the return interval for that? And should you consider levee failure or not? I think up to this point, we've never, ever taken the stance to consider levee failure. But if we're really saying, okay, we don't want people to move in areas that are endangered, don't we need to address the levee failure part or not? So there's a lot of work. None of this can be resolved here. I'm just trying to say that this steering committee has got some really big issues to come to grips with and to try to pull together. So it's going to be an awesome task.
The committee will bring back for consultation and eventually decision by the board. But yes, thank you for all that. It's big, it's complex, but it's needed. I thought you were raising your hand to talk. You're managing the slides, so they're appropriate to the comments being made by the board. Any other comments from the board? I'm going to ask the audience.
in upstream urban areas, especially in the West Roseville specific plan area is one that we've been focused on a lot lately, but I know this is something that is going to start impacting a lot more areas. So that's just something to, maybe this is the right place for it, maybe not, but it's an issue that, excuse me, an issue we need to focus on a little bit. So with that, thank you for your time and look forward to the committee.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else standing up or raising their hand. Are you? Just come on forward.
I believe that's off agenda. Get off agenda.
Oh, we're not quite at public comment. Is this toward the designated floodway? We'll get to you in just a minute. Do we have any hands up?
Yes, we have Matt Zadar
Matt Zadar.
and Rick Reinhardt.
Mr. Zadar and then Mr. Reinhardt. Mr. Zadar, who unmutes him? Matt Zadar.
Good day. Can you hear me?
Just barely.
Oh, goodness sakes. I'll try to
Oh,
talk.
that's better.
I've
That's
to
good.
bring the, a little bit of local perspective, you know, coming from the San Joaquin Public Works and the Flood Control Water Conservation District. Number one, this is really great. It really needs to be done, and I laud your efforts. I'm also on the CVFPB board, but I certainly don't speak for the board, but I'm glad to see that there is proposed for representation there on the stakeholder group. In terms of the approach, we do the NFIP, obviously, and the flood plain part of things. And boy, as I look at that Cache Creek map and what was the designated floodplain or floodway, we're going to be getting up into the floodplain, and there's a big need to really think about what local government and county government's dealing with. You know, we're involved in both the encroachment side of things and NFIP, and I think all of this is really good. But I would draw your attention to the need for the physical map revisions and map modernization per FEMA. And there's a whole lot of areas where local government needs to do that, and where we're dealing with the flood plain and the floodway overlap. Just, I'm not sure how we do that. I'm glad you've introduced the issue, and I'll look forward to talking about that a lot more and encouraging not just CVFCA, but some local government perspective there, especially with changes to the risk reduction 2 and the other things that are coming down our pipeline there. And also just the one thing that wasn't in the pie was the need for communication and engagement, and really think about that as we get the word out. Such a great opportunity to educate and bring some consideration. You know, we can't do this with casts of thousands, but I really see the need to get the word out about the good work that you guys are endeavoring into here. And again, just want to say thank you and make sure local government and the CVFCA is in there. And we think about what happens with the floodplain as we start revising the floodway. And thank you.
Oh, thank you, sir, for your comments. Us guys appreciate it. Mr. Reinhardt. It's my thing. We're going to take Mr. Reinhardt, then we'll get to you, sir. Mr. Reinhardt?
Thank you, President Dolan. Unfortunately, the audio stopped working when Tom Engler gave his comments. And so I was going to build on some of his, so I apologize if any of these are repetitive.
Oh, no, please do. I wondered what happened there. Everybody started walking around Tom. So yes, please say it, Mr. Reinhardt.
The first is I want to build on a comment that Board Member Griego made about agriculture. I believe there was a suggestion that maybe there are exemptions for groundwater projects and environmental restoration projects, and would suggest that you add that exemption to include ag structures and ag activities as you consider exemptions from these regulations. The second comment I wanted to make is I haven't heard a discussion about whether expansion of the regulated floodplain is going to require purchase of easements. And I put that as one of the issues that needs to be explored is if the regulated floodplain is going to result in the diminution of value of properties that aren't currently in the 100-year floodplain, is that a takings that's going to require the board to purchase easements as part of implementation of these regulations. The next comment I want to make was on climate change. You're just wondering, and this is really a question for the department. The department has stated that the work they've done so far is planning level and that they're moving towards design level climate change hydrology for the 2027 update. Is the information that's been generated to date appropriate for use in a regulatory context? And if you do use it, what parameters are you using? Are you using the low, mid, high forecast? Are you using a 20-year projection, a 50-year projection? I think there's a lot of discussion that needs to occur around how do you use the climate change hydrology in this context? And then the last comment I want to make is about the importance of this for areas upstream of the urban communities that are making ULOP findings and making sure that development upstream of the SPFC is regulated in a way so that development actions aren't adversely affecting those ULOP findings over time. There are concerns. I have concerns in projects I've reviewed because CEQA only requires looking at impacts at the 100-year. It doesn't have a 200-year standard. And so most of the development EIRs that I see, development-related EIRs, have no information on the 200-year floodplain. And so with that, look forward to working with your committee on implementation of the update to the designated floodway. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'm glad the recording came back. I was not aware, Mr. Engler, that we missed you, but I took notes while you're talking. Any other hands raised?
No.
Okay. Last call, board members. You can have it after I do public. Audience? Okay, we have, we're at the point now that is public comment, so it's beyond just designated floodway, the agenda item, so we're moving away from the agenda item. Okay? All right, let me call them in the order they were given to me. Sergio Diaz. Mr. Diaz, you are representing self.
I'm
which
representing myself.
Which is good.
Good afternoon for this very informative presentation. My name is Sergio Diaz. Honorable President Jane Dolan, Vice President Mike Vilnas, Secretary Brian Johnson, board members, and Central Valley Flood Protection Board. I wish I was an engineer. I wish I were an engineer. I am not. I am an attorney, and I'm just concerned about the importance of what you're doing. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today regarding the board's ongoing vital mission to designate floodways and to review the modernization of these floodways with the purpose of protecting public improvements and the lives in light of the increase in development resulting in the encroachment of designated floodways, development based on outdated designated floodway boundaries, and climate change and changing hydrology due to more intense rainfall events coupled with faster melting snowpacks, increasing flood risk. Just several general comments. The Central Valley Flood Protection Board designated floodway program is the board's primary program to reduce flood risk through non-structural floodplain management. Our communities are grateful to the board and its staff for creating and maintaining the designated floodway program, modernizing the designated floodway to incorporate current and future hydrology use of up-to-date hydraulic models will assist communities in rural areas and preserve hydraulic capacity and protect beneficial and allowed uses of this floodway. The Central Valley Flood Protection Board may consider designating floodways for events larger than the 100-year event as guides for cities and counties. The Lower American River designated floodway, located in an urban area of Sacramento along the American River, requires protection that only the designated floodway can provide. The Central Valley Flood Protection Board is urged by our communities to continue to disallow major variances for the construction of habitable dwellings within the designated floodway and adopted plans of flood control, particularly in light of climate change that is exacerbating the risk of catastrophic flooding. Citizen groups in Rancho Cordova, river conservation nonprofits, and Native American tribes are closely monitoring a proposal before the city of Rancho Cordova to fill a critical portion of the American River designated floodway along the American River for the purpose of building high-end riverfront homes. Their concern is that should flooding occur resulting in loss of life and property, neither the builder nor the city will have financial responsibility, and the loss will be observed by the homeowners. The developer of the homes to be built in the designated floodway, currently under consideration by the city of Rancho Cordova, previously submitted a request for a major revision, which the Central Valley Flood Protection Board staff did not recommend to this board for approval. Thereafter, the builder withdrew its request for the variance. Nevertheless, the project is quickly moving forward in the city of Rancho Cordova, who apparently supports the designated field and housing development toward approval. Our communities respectfully urge the board to continue to protect the Central Valley designated floodways, modernize the floodways, and protect the American River designated floodways, which alone with the adjacent river parkway is the crown jewel of Sacramento. I've heard all your comments today, and I'm very gratified for them. I'd like to say that I recognize that you have a small staff, and yet you have a great responsibility. Unlike the Department of Water Resources, your staff is very small, and I presume your budget is equally small. Yet the legislature has vested you with great responsibility, and that statutory and regulatory authority is vested in you. And it says protect our floodways. The Central Valley is a place that is prone to flooding. There's great pressure right now for urbanization, for the building of new homes, as I just indicated. That pressure comes from something that's known as the Housing Affordability Act, which is Senate Bill 35, Senate Bill 330, and many others. That bill says that notwithstanding the streamlined process for review and approval of new homes, that CEQA still applies. Nothing has changed. What has changed is that the impetus for building of new homes has changed. The designated floodway is what protects communities. When a builder builds in a community and unfortunately a flood comes, that builder has gone on to their next project, and that builder is leaving the responsibility, the financial responsibility, and the ruin for those who live there. So I ask you to continue to do your job, which you're doing marvelously, and do not back away from the legislature, the authority that the legislature has vested in you. Thank you very much.
Your comments are noted. The next person, Mark Berry. Mr. Berry? There you are. I noted you said 3A, which is actually designated floodway, so if I called you out of order, I apologize, but good
I
afternoon.
have to probably apologize to you, Chairman Dolan, because I probably should have, I'm not used to these meetings very much, so I think I'm out of turn a little bit. But yeah, I would like to speak to the designated floodway. And first off, I'd like to thank the board and for all you do. The more I get involved in watching these, the more I realize how truly complicated what it is that you're trying to accomplish, different needs, different priorities, agriculture, residential construction, and so there's a lot that has to be accomplished. You know, yeah, I've been involved with construction for 3.5 decades. I've had a company, so I'm a little familiar with the process and what happens, but I don't have the expertise that you people do with regard to flooding. But one of the things I just wanted to bring to light, at least for me, is my experience, and one of the rivers I think of is the LA River. And you look at that river, and I've heard water is life. And I look at that river and I wonder if maybe that's not an oversimplification. You know, rivers are life. And you have, and we have in Northern California, truly a remarkable and great thing to protect here. And when I look at the LA River, I think of that as the epitome of this simplified sort of analysis that was offered to the board of how to look at the river and managing floodways. And, you know, I reflect back to, you know, when I was, I'm a California native, and when I was born, you know, there were 3 billion people in the world. So soon we're going to have 9 billion. You know, I get lucky on the roll of the dice, maybe there'll be 12 billion people by the time I part. But that's going to be a lot of encroachment on these rivers. And I think it's very aptly said that water will do what water will do. You know, if I do make it through a few more decades, it'll only be 100 years. That river, and from what I've seen, just I had the benefit of a father who loved the outdoors. Boy, these rivers and waterways have changed tremendously. You know, I can remember always seeing salmon scooching up the rivers, you know, in corridors for wildlife. And, you know, maybe that's not in how people design and engineers and just sort of looking at just the rivers as a vertical entity. But I think we're learning more and more now that there's more to a river than just the water flow, than just channeled water. And so, you know, the other thing that kind of comes to mind is, you know, when you're managing rivers, it's really not just a local issue. I think of local entities and local governments. And what I witness in my experience is, you know, you can have general plans that say we discourage building in floodplains, okay? You can have zoning that says based on those general plans, we're not going to build within a floodplain. But nevertheless, these proposals and the impetus for local governments, you know, for their own, you know, needs and particular needs and motivations to community, economics, whatever it is, have an interest in making encroachments into those floodways. And you as the board have to bring us all back into a line with how you really protect a river. You know, what is it we're really trying to do with the values of the rivers as populations increase, the encroachment and the uses of those will increase. And with that, you know, the river's not just the water, but it's the sediment that goes down it. It's the water basin that, you know, feeds the riparian water vegetation along the riverbank. So, you know, it's not just that narrow channel. We have to think of this wider expansion. So, you know, I would encourage the board, as you know, I heard about how complicated this is going to be. Thank you very much. But the existing designated floodways, let's keep those. I mean, we don't know where this river is going to go. But if we need to expand those, that should be something to be considered. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. They are noted. Oh, here it is. The third and last card that I have is Brenda Guston. I was going to say Guston, and I talked with you and you told me. Brenda Guston. Good afternoon.
Hi. Thank you for everything that you're doing. As Mr. Berry was saying, learned so much about, the complexity of what you have charge of. Kayaking down the river, American River, a couple weeks ago, and as I learn more about it and I see some of the building that's been allowed over the years, and then how the erosion takes place, and then there's the ugly shot creek that's you know, along the edges, and then there's the difference between the natural land and all the animals and how they live, and then on the other side the riprap, and there's no life. It's so different, and we don't understand that as citizens. And so as I look through what you're putting together, I wanted to address it just also having to do with the flood management. I'm a native of Sacramento and have experienced many floods here. So at the National Flood Management Conference in May of 2004, Sacramento was in the top 4 states to be in danger of disaster from flooding. While reclamation of floodways has been a common practice with our predecessors, I thank you all for the work you are doing in protecting public improvements, lives, land use values, and improvements created in reliance upon historical flooding patterns as written in your Water Code 8609. Listening to testimony from experts at the Department of Water Resources, I've learned the importance to preserve floodways and their adjacent floodplains for their significant and beneficial functions that provide safety and resiliency during climatic events while serving as a community amenity and place for wildlife to thrive. Billions of dollars are being spent to rebuild and restructure levees in California and to meet the higher standards required by 2025. Over 4,000 citizens locally have signed a petition to stop development in a floodway on the south side of the federal and state wild and scenic American River. They are fully aware how this floodway has reduced flood risk and protected their neighborhoods throughout the years. We acknowledge your commitment to California Water Code Section 8609 to control encroachments in and to preserve the flow regimens of floodways for the purpose of protecting public improvements, lives, land use values, and improvements created in reliance upon historical flooding patterns, and agree it is extremely important to avoid more intensely developed land uses and recognize the benefits provided to the state's goals for flood risk reduction. While historical flooding patterns inform your agency, I understand it is very difficult for many citizens to understand or even accept climate change and the changing hydrology and its effects when they haven't yet experienced or quickly forget heavy rainfall events and flooding, such as those prior to and including 1986, 1995, 97, 2006, 2017, and 2023. I want to thank you for your focus to modernize the designated floodways by preserving the land and creating new maps and models to more efficiently and cost-effectively design projects with maximum impacts to floodways. And lastly, your intention to better inform the public is necessary and very much appreciated. So thank you for all that you're doing.
I let you talk longer because you complimented us, so thank you.
I'm sorry, I went over.
Just saying. All right, any last comments for today? Not forever, hear from the board. Mr. Torres?
I have 2 more slides. They're really quick, but we don't have to, it's just, I mean, we can.
I'm going to give you a minute. Put them up.
All right.
You're pretty brave. I was going to do next steps, but you can go right ahead.
It's not working out.
So it's a setup for you. It's a setup for you.
Can you remember what it is?
Yes, oh, here we go. We're proposing that.
Oh, you have a timeline.
It's a timeline. We're hoping to be able to.
It's too long.
do this over 5 years.
Too long.
Okay. As long as, one of the challenges is going to be to have this funded. As soon as this is funded.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
The next one, which is really the one that I wanted to bring up, is just that I would like to identify the committee within the next 30 days.
Okay, stop right there, because I was thinking, I'm going to designate, because I didn't see anybody say no. You've got President Dolan, Board Member Ramirez. So you're going to work with the executive officer, you're going to figure out a way for us to meet as quickly as possible that meets everyone's schedule. And that's the first thing on that. You all figure out staff. And then that first meeting is, okay, how do we begin this committee? And there'll probably be iterations to the committee as it goes along. Because we're not going to wait for some agency we really want. We're going to start moving. Okay. Did you get that? It's probably going to be Zoom, but we'll try to make it.
I second.
Oh, that was a presidential order.
We were not asked to vote.
Oh, that would be that decree. All right, does anyone oppose having that group meet soon? Okay, thank you. I can't read the next one.
The last point is that, yes, we're proposing a timeline to engage other agencies and identify all those stakeholders. So just noting that that is an important part of this process. That's why it was included in the presentation. Just
We
wanted to
probably
have that
want
on
to
record.
identify more what DWR involvement means.
Right,
And that's a massive organization.
agreed.
We don't want them all. Is that a compliment or not? Yes. Okay. You all know, I appreciate your comments. You're the board. I'm just the wrangler. Okay.
And that was it. Thank
On
you.
your last slide, that was not, we should say thank you to you. That was great. And we're going to be sent that slide, so that's.
Yes.
That's going to be good. Mr. Harvey, do you have any concluding remarks?
No.
Okay. So just get that committee going as fast as possible. Already asked the board. Member Bosler? Member decrees are allowed.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing I've learned today is just the complexity of this. It's not just about updating maps. It's about all of the other legal issues that go along with the designation. And so I think there is a lot of value into really thinking about a phased approach here, to hopefully help and bring people along. I mean, I think information is power, to help people do the right thing and help communities navigate this. But it is inherently very controversial as well. So I think we have a really unique role here in the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. We have this interest jurisdiction. We have this unique responsibility because of the way in which the Central Valley was developed in the water and infrastructure. And so I think this is clearly a role for us and the state. And so I just would encourage everyone moving forward, but thinking about a phased approach to help kind of move it along. Because there are going to be a lot of points of reckoning, but we don't need to, we should make sure that we can get information before people shut it down, kind of thing.
That's a great idea. Put that on the agenda, Mr. EO. For sure. Okay. Anyone else? Anything else for the good of the order? We ready to adjourn? Our workshop is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you. What is your organization? HDR, so I'm an engineering consultant.